Thank you, and thank you all. This has just been such a fabulous conference. The papers this morning were wonderful, and we're just, it's really exciting to be a part of this. We are 4 faculty members at KU who work in different departments, and we had some support from a collaborative research grant at the Hall Center for the Humanities to explore the implications of laptop music on questions of improvisation, embodiment, and and difference. So from 4 different departments, we've been collaborating on research, performance, and teaching using a musical instrument developed by composer Pauline Oliveros called the Adaptive Use Musical Instrument. She's been working on this instrument with her team at the Deep Listening Institute in Kingston, New York, and with an international research team of which we have become, our group has become a consortium member of this international research team working on the Adaptive Use Musical Instrument. So we're all going to talk, not at once, but like 5 minutes a piece at a time. So I'm going to just start out. My name is Sherry Tucker, and I am going to begin by telling you just a little bit about the Adaptive Use Musical Instrument. What is it, and how did it come about? And then we're all going to share our perspectives on the AUMI, which is how we call it, and how and its capacities for helping us materialize the ephemeral from our various disciplines. Myself in American Studies, Michelle Heffner Hayes in dance, Nicole Hodges-Persley in theater, and Kip Haaheim in the music department. So we're going to end up where you might expect us to begin, with a composer in the music department who works with laptop and laptop music. So, what is the AUMI, and what is its story? The AUMI, I'll show the slide again at the end, but if you want to download the AUMI, it's actually a free download. Usually instruments of this sort, it's created particularly to adapt to all bodies, so it was created to work for people with disabilities, but it works with people with really, any body can play this instrument. That's the download for the free download. And then that's our website if you want to see what we're doing here at University of Kansas, and I'll return to that slide at the end. This is our website here. We're getting ready to do an amazing performance opportunity with an all abilities performance called three rehearsals and a performance, no experience necessary, at Spooner Hall. So the performance will take place on October 30th, and if you're interested in participating, you have to come to all the rehearsals, but you certainly may, and we have handouts in the back. So the story of the Adaptive Use Musical Instrument. What happened was, there was an occupational therapist named Leif Miller in Poughkeepsie, New York, who had a drum circle at a school called Abilities First School, which is a school for kids with disabilities. And she was frustrated with the drum circle because not everybody at the school could participate. Many of the students could participate, but not everybody could participate because except with having a hand-over-hand method, where say somebody would have a rhythm instrument strapped in their hand or put in their hand, and then somebody else would shake it like that. So she wanted to find a way that everyone could participate in her drum circle. Now, because she's a drummer and she lives in Poughkeepsie, and the Deep Listening Institute is in the Hudson Valley as well, she happens to know Pauline Oliveros. So she says, "Pauline, help us out." And Pauline says, "What do you need?" And Leif says, "You've been on the cutting edge of music and technology for 60 years, which is absolutely true." And so Pauline Oliveros asked to meet 3 of the students at the school who had the very least mobility of all, the very least mobility. And she got her team at Deep Listening Institute, and also she teaches, she's in her 80s, but she teaches at Rensselaer Polytechnic, and so she also got her team there to work on devising an instrument that would adapt to all bodies. And so this is Leif with her new instrument at the school, and this is the instrument we've been working with. It works off camera tracking, and we'll demonstrate it later, and you'll also have an opportunity if you want to try it out at lunch. We'll have it set up in the table in the back. But it has a lot of different settings that adapt to movement. It can be played with breathing, it can be played with just a small head movement. And so this is Leif's new setup after she got the AUMI, and this is these are 3 of the musicians that were then able to participate in the jam sessions that were held every Friday, who were not able to participate before. And all 3 of them became regular members of this, regular members who are playing autonomously, who are not having somebody move them. And so, the big questions for me in American Studies, I'm always interested in how social relations are configured through musical interaction. That's been my field for a long time, and so the ALMI is incredibly interesting to me on that level. They're not all musical cultures make it possible for people with different bodies to participate. For instance, Western classical music draws a line even between the left-handed and right-handed violinist in terms of what kind of body can participate. And already the violin itself is constructing a particular kind of body. So what kinds of communities are not based on ideals of sameness, but on difference as creative, generative, and important, have been very important to me in American Studies. And so the ALMI gets at questions about community. What kinds of communities don't rely on everybody being the same? Sarah Ahmed has a great thing about the pea pod, that the peas in the pod are a community not because they're identical, because peas aren't identical, but because the pod is flexible. And so if a community can be a kind of flexible skin that can adapt to the bodies that are in it, and that's what kind of community the ALMI facilitates. And so finally, what kinds of research questions can get at questions of improvising communities, bodies, and difference. And with my privilege of being able to collaborate with my colleagues in dance, in theater, and in music, I've really been excited about thinking about not so much doing research on improvisation, but doing improvisation as research, something I've been very happy to be able to work with Michelle Heffner-Hayes, co-teaching classes and working and improvising together with that. And so Michelle is now going to share some perspectives on the ALMI and improvised dance.
The all-important arrow key. Mm-hmm. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for coming to participate in this discussion. We're all very excited about this project. And in my little section, I'm going to talk about the issues that have emerged so far from the point of entry of the class that I have co-taught with Sherry Tucker. We combine my undergraduate dance improvisation course with a graduate course in embodiment and difference in improvisation. And that's been a really successful partnership in ways that we never anticipated. But in terms of ALMI and dance improvisation, the elements of enlightenment, if you will, have to do with interacting with the ALMI, either by playing it directly or by moving to the sounds created by it. And on the basic level, for choreographers and dancers, ALMI has the power to create new movement, either in the choreographic process or in the live performance of improvisation. And what happens when that movement emerges is that ALMI confounds the traditional dancer's notion of virtuosity. Since ALMI captures small movements rather than large athletic displays of motion, it privileges an economy of scale. We found that an experienced ALMI user, like the 3 young people that you saw on the screen, who appear to have limited movement, may make informed, whimsical, intelligent, sophisticated compositional decisions, while a highly athletic user, like one of my dance majors, has to spend time adjusting to the parameters of the instrument. The challenges of problem-solving relationships to the ALMI, either by trying to manipulate sound or by grappling with those sounds as a partner, forces the performer to muster solutions to problems at quicksilver speed, or alternately with excruciating slowness and patience, and both of those lessons are very important. It requires the participants to move outside their comfort zones and take risks, and creates a general mindset that gleefully seeks solutions, or calmly faces the impossibility of resolution when confronted by problems. And these are highly desirable skills to have when confronted by complex situations in so-called real life. I spent a lot of time writing about theories of the body, and the AUMI has allowed us to begin a discussion of the theoretical considerations of this space in terms of the body and abilities. And I have a picture here of a choreographer that I used to work with named Gerda Koenig. She's from Wuppertal, Germany, and her company is called Dinah 13. And Dinah is a weight of paper. You have Dinahs 1 through 12, apparently, are all the weights of paper. And Dinah 13 does not exist. So that's why she named her company Dinah 13. And this piece I saw done before a group of international arts presenters, and it completely scandalized the audience because it portrayed a disabled woman in an erotic scenario, and it really challenged a lot of people's assumptions about bodies, disability, and desire. And there are a lot of choreographers working globally with these issues, but bringing this into the classroom has been exciting because it asks certain questions. What happens when we dismiss the notion of the binary opposition of able-bodied and disabled bodies? Where do bodies begin and end? In the context of the AUMI, frequently we see the AUMI as part of the performer's body. What happens when we do not pathologize disabilities as something to be cured, but instead, at least in the consideration of the performance, regard all bodies as operating under a series of unique constraints? What if we view all bodies as constantly changing, negotiating a spectrum of ease and dis-ease that varies according to the factors that cross the boundaries of categories like gender, race, class, ability, sexual orientation? And because this has been a teaching environment, AUMI has been very valuable in light of these considerations as a pedagogical tool. It accommodates different intentions and outcomes. I find that as a teacher, I have a great deal to learn in these environments. I'm reminded that I need different tools to teach different populations that vary from generation to physical ability, to cultures of origin. This image is of the youth company of a group called Canduco in Great Britain, and they do incredible work. It's called Mixed Ability or Inclusive Dance. And as teaching artists, my students need to be able to enter their classrooms with the ability to address the needs of whatever group awaits them. The rigor of mindfulness in the use of the AUMI has implications for how they teach in any environment and how we interact with one another as members of a community. Finally, and for me most importantly, I have a belief that the arts transform our communities. And arts advocates spend a great deal of time trying to legitimize the importance of the arts in terms of their economic impact or the ways in which the arts support educational outcomes in other subjects. And there's data to support those positions, and that's all valuable. But for me, working with other people in the studio, touching other bodies, allowing myself to support and be supported through the connections we form in that space, forges understandings and relationships of empathy and mutual responsibility that I have not seen outside that space of engagement. And I think that there are implications in that space that might carry across scenarios and disciplines.
You're up. Oh, I got a slide. Thank you. Okay, so I don't have to push any more slides, right?
No.
Okay. All right. A little shorter. Hi, everyone. I'm Nicole Hodges-Persley. I'm a theater professor, and I'm also an actor and director who uses improvisation quite a bit in my processes of teaching and also in directing. So I come to the instrument very interested in how race, ethnicity, and class shape its usage. That's my specialty, is working in cross-racial and ethnic performance. So that's some of the findings that I have working with actors using the instruments I'd like to share with you now. So really, I have 3 points that I wanted to talk about AUMI as a technology, and it's really about how the performer changes the technology and how the technology affects the performer. And so it really makes sense that this is instrument that is designed to improvise, so that the fact that there will be this open variable in its usage that's open to repetition and revision is something that is really exciting for me. So I want to offer you a soundbite for some of the research questions that this has prompted in my work, and what it has offered me in teaching actors across the ability spectrum. And the first is, how is the technology affected by and has affect upon the bodies that are using it? And does it really illuminate this spectrum of movement economies that have shifting meaning that are produced through the usage? And secondly, I'm interested in what's lost in translation between the digital and the material through the process of engaging the technology, and that technology really being dependent on the body's usage of it. So I'm really offering these points as a way to think about what I'm kind of playing with, this idea of digital capture of performance, and how we can think about the ways that the capture of ephemeral performances allow us ways to analyze how these processes of translation are occurring between the material and the ephemeral. So last spring, when I had the opportunity to bring OMI software into my undergraduate classroom, I was teaching actors a whole course on improvisation, mostly focusing on dramatic and comedic improvisation, from comedic being like whose line is it anyway stuff, to more dramatic work that we've seen in other films, like Mike Nichols and others have created films that using improvisation. Lee Daniels recently in The Butler strongly uses improvisational tactics with his actors. And all the actors in the class were able-bodied, but two identified themselves as having learning disabilities. And so I explained to them that I really wanted to explore certain types of economies of movement, and what could the limited mobility teach them about how they could experience affect, or how they could use their bodies to have influence or affect change in everyday life. And so I used video capture of their experiences engaging the technology, watching, it was about 4 male, 3 female students. They're all self-identified as being of European descent. And they really struggled to modulate their mobility in order to adapt to the scale of the OMI instrument. And what was so interesting is that they resisted the directions on how to use the instrument. They were frustrated by their perceptions of what the technology could or could not do, no matter how many times we told them. And they talked back to the technology as if it was animated. And so not only did the instrument have affect on them, but the instrument's capacities were simultaneously affected and limited and enlarged by their negotiations of the scales. The spectrum binary that was produced through their interactions between the fully mobile and the non-mobile, it started to stretch and shift the stereotypes that I had about particular economies of movement. And so what I was seeing occur was that it was actually the scale of limited mobility that had the highest value in the interaction. And so this really started to skew some assumptions that I had, and also I think the students had, about what is this notion that we have of desired status that is conflated with mobility. And so that was something that was very exciting for me in engaging the instrument. So as far as me engaging this idea of this digital capture of ephemerality, the idea of translation becomes really important for me in my research because I'm mostly looking at race and ethnicity and how it affects artistic practices. So now adding disability to the scale, it lets me think about the ways that particular fluencies of ability and disability have their own processes of translation, and that they can't be translated word for word at all. That there is some possibility of us exploring the act of experience and doing have very important values to how we make sense of the technology. So, am I at time? Because I have more. I think I should be. But one of the things, 2 minutes to wrap up, is that what I found in watching the videotape of the interactions was that because there was no stable discourse between mobility and disability, students found what defaulted to the discourses that were stable to talk about difference, which were race and class, right? So they started to conflate disability discourses that, with what they knew about difference through race and class experiences. So that is something that I'm still, working through, and now engaging more videotape with the material, so that I can dig through how people kind of go to these default languages that they have more critical consciousness engaging, and to impose that upon their scales of ability and disability. Thanks.
So I work with computers. I embrace computers. I love computers. I sleep with computers. Literally. Well, not literally. Like on my bed table. It's right there. At the same time, I do still own a letter opener. How many of you actually own a letter opener? Fewer and fewer, but it's sort of an interesting artifact. I also have a fountain pen. I love my fountain pen, even though it gets ink all over my fingers and it's a pain in the ass. It's actually kind of terrible technology when you compare it to a really quality rollerball gel pen. Terrible, but I love it. There's just something about it. I also agree. Like one of the interesting things that Rachel was pointing out is that I feel like it really does pay to know something about how the technology actually works, particularly in terms of troubleshooting when it doesn't work, when you're supposed to get something done. But also, with my car, I want my car to work. I don't really want to spend the time learning about my car. I'd rather learn about my computer because that's what I want more. So it's just interesting, thoughts that the forum has brought up so far. And one last thing which touched me was the thing with the digitizing of books. Like one of the things that didn't come up, which I think is significant for me, is in the following. I was in the library, in the music library, and I checked out a book by Henry Cowell. Does anyone know who Henry Cowell is? Henry Cowell was a composer, musician of the American avant-garde movement in the mid-century. Tremendously influential composer with a kind of tragic story. He was actually incarcerated at a maximum security prison for being gay in the 50s, I guess, or something. It seems astonishing to me. Anyway, so this guy is a very wonderful idol, sort of, of mine. And I was reading this book, I opened up the first page, and on one of those blank pages, he had signed it.
Wow.
So, we had the book in our library, and he actually had signed the copy. And so it had, to me, that had kind of a totally different meaning to it that would just be completely lost. Well, not completely lost, but at least somewhat lost in the digitizing process. Something about the connection, is missing there. Anyway, so my presentation as part of this, as a musician and composer, discussing this notion of digital music and embodiment versus non-embodiment. I thought that what I would do is perform for you a short musical phrase. And I'm going to do it 3 different ways. First way, I'm going to do just with my laptop using this using software that I wrote to do that. The second way, I'm going to perform slightly different, and you'll see the difference. And then the third way, I'm going to use the OMI software to show you. And I think that it will become, pretty clear the sort of the point of what I'm talking about. So the first thing I have to do now, and this is part of the performance. So you have to imagine the lights are off, and that there's a spotlight. So I'm, kind of, performance. I would be more the center of attention than in a situation like this. So let's see if we can get to it. performance number 1. So the thing is, if I can point out a few things. First, most importantly, it looks like I'm checking my email. I'm on Facebook, liking something, or on YouTube, not like, disliking. But I couldn't resist, though. Like at one point at the very end, I did something. I was trying not to, but I couldn't not. I don't know if you noticed that. But, anyway, so I would suggest that this might work okay if something else were going on. Like for example, if Michelle is doing a dance while this is going on. So because you're watching her doing the performance, and then this is going on. It seems like a pretty viable method. But if I'm just sitting here by myself, it's a terribly dull performance of this. Okay, so I'm going to do it a different way.
You ready for your next slide?
Yes.
Oh.
All right. So this one is completely different, I would argue. That because I'm actually using some kind of implement, and it looks like it actually takes some kind of skill. Even though I did make a mistake, there's also that living on the edge. When you're doing a lot of performance, it's possible to do it wrong. But that makes a total difference. Now I would say that in this case, because it does require these implements, that it's just slightly less than embodied, completely embodied. But this is how music normally goes. Like usually there's a musical instrument involved, and the person who's performing is interacting, in part with their body and how they're projecting their work, and also with the musical instrument itself and its limitations. All right, so now I'll do the same performance, but with the ohm. You can see what's different about that. Again, I have to set it up to work properly. This is one of those moments where just before I can hear it. It's like that, you can really feel the difference between each one of those performances and how the digital. As far as the computer is concerned, the computer did exactly the same thing 3 times. But as close as I could make it. It would have done exactly the same thing 3 times in a row if I could have done it that way. So there's one other important difference I would point out, that not only is it different for you as the listener and as the viewer of the experience, but it's totally different for me when I'm performing. Like I have to use every bit of my training when I'm playing just the keyboard like this to be engaged with the material in terms of the timing of events and how to do things and the expressiveness of it. And it's difficult. It's very difficult to do, and it's easier just to sort of just do it like I'm typing. Whereas this example, requires a different kind of focus, a qualitative difference in terms of the focus. And yet again, when I'm doing it without anything and just using my body, it elicits a completely different internal response. And so that's what I talk. Do you have any closing comments?
I think we can take some questions, maybe, yeah. And invite people, if anybody's going to be around next week, our first rehearsal is on Wednesday.
Please come.
Yeah. So here we have, are there questions? We have time for questions?
Yep.
Is it me?
Yeah, but there's one behind you, and then we'll get you.
Yeah. So, which of those three ways of doing this actually makes you realize more what's under the hood of the technology you're engaging?
That's an interesting question. I guess that in this particular case, the middle one, because I had to write the software to do it, and so I really had to, I really had to understand it,
But if I came to it naively, I feel like I could master the third one much easier than the first one. The first one would require me to know more about what's under the hood. So is there an argument based on the things we were saying before that that's the way one should do it?
That's interesting. That's an interesting point. Like the basic interface that I'm using for the first one is I just have, I press the A key and that makes one sound, and then I press the S key and that makes a different sound, and then I use the K and the L key. And so I could teach you how to do that in a minute. So it wouldn't take very much skill, really. Now, if you had to figure it out all on your own without any kind of documentation, it would be prohibitively difficult, I suppose. But the same thing is true, I think, of the last one. Is that there is a certain amount of a learning curve. You have to figure out, okay, what will I do? I think that Michelle was pointing out that sometimes people get really frustrated with that because it does require a certain limitation, or you have to move in a way that isn't really quite natural, and then you can easily overwhelm the technology at this point.
Yeah, leaping is discouraged.
Yeah.
You don't get any, it's funny, and normally, especially young dancers are like, bigger, stronger, faster. What can I do that's acrobatic that will impress people?
One aspect of the improvisation that I didn't mention was that the technology aspect of it, because the commitment to make the instrument free and to make it an improvising community across abilities means that everybody who uses it is a researcher, and Pauline Oliveros at the Deep Listening Institute wants feedback. So if it isn't working, it doesn't do anything when I leave. You can provide that feedback. But then there's people who are volunteers, people who are spending part of their time trying to improvising, figuring out how to make it work on their platforms, how to make it constantly trying to make it. There's a commitment to making it free. And there's an iPad app that costs $9.99 to help support the technology, especially the technological help for if something isn't working. But that part of the improvising community are the technologists who are constantly working on it.
And one thing you can do with it too that changes the scale a bit, and what we did in my acting class was to actually load. You can put in so we tried putting in samples to increase the possibility of, say, a young person who wants to produce beats for techno music or hip hop or something like that has very limited scale mobility. They could actually kind of figure out how to compose beats. And so to disrupt the kind of classical moment in it, I wanted to put in different types of music to kind of unsettle the fact that music is like these kind of lyrical, kind of classical references.
Okay, one more question. Is there? Okay. I was really interested, Dr. Hodges-Persley, you mentioned that when you were working with students, they sort of relied on sort of conversations and discourse around basic class rather than being able to sort of talk directly about disability. So I'm interested in hearing a little bit more about that, but also I mean, all of you all teach all this stuff, sort of how has it changed how folks talk about ability, disability, or how they sort of reconcile their experience with how they're talking about their interaction?
It was interesting. It was, I guess, it's really a language of the post-racial, of race without race, right? Or like Eduardo Benito Silva's racism without races. And it's kind of embedded, right? So it'll be like, you know, when people like that have, you know, like they can't move their bodies and stuff, and so, you know, they probably wouldn't want to do this anyway, because, you know, they're kind of like, you know, not interested, and they have groups that they hang out with, so, you know, why can't we use it this way, right? I mean, so it started to get coded in particular types of ways that we could, you know, see the reference point of those people and them. That was shocking to me, but not really. It was just like, I wasn't really anticipating it, but then I was like, oh, it makes perfect sense.
I wonder if what we're talking about here is embodiment or aesthetics. I mean, it seems to me that there's a group I quite like, which is a speaker, and there's a guy who plays an electric flute, someone else who plays a bass, and there's someone who plays a laptop. And that's really cool. You know? There's a sort of a sense of removedness that this person has, but they're still very much performing. So I wonder, in your performance examples, if what you're really talking about is sort of additional aesthetic interpretation rather than embodiment or disability.
Well, and of course, also, I mean, going along those lines, getting to the challenging of what actually constitutes a performance. You know, and I mean, sort of the other unspoken thing is how does it actually influence the composition, the creative process in the first place? You know, people, you know, it's natural to kind of, you know, the tool that you're using really does influence a lot what kind of things you come up with. And you can test this out if you write with your left hand, you know, with your non-dominant hand, you'll come up with different things that you wouldn't have thought of with, you know, writing with your dominant hand. The same thing is true. You know, like I'm constantly working with students, trying to get them to not have the computer limit them by what it's good at, but more like how do you take charge of it, you know, and make, you know, sort of mold it to your own vision. But you know, you're absolutely right. I tried to, by doing the same performance 3 different ways, I tried to, you know, kind of minimize the difference of aesthetic, because it's but that definitely is part of it. And you know, it'd be interesting, you know, like next time you watch this group perform, or you go see them play, you know, so watch what the laptop player does. Like, what is that person doing to make it a performance, as opposed to just looking like they're checking your email? And sometimes you can really embrace it, so you can check your email in a really interesting way.
Yeah, really embrace it.
The ALMI as an instrument calls attention to embodiment in a different way, in that it is responding to your movement. And so I feel like it feels very different. And if you're playing in a group of people who wouldn't be able to create something together otherwise, and say you have a group that cognitively processes differently, a group that has different relationships to cause and effect, it really challenges ideas that are permeate ideas of aesthetic. What is aesthetic? Because you've got all of a sudden, you know, virtuosity. What does it mean? Virtuosity doesn't actually work very well on the ALMI. And so it's very open to making something together that's not about one, you know, mastery and control.
Although I have to say, I was really impressed by Kip's performance.
Especially this one.
The control that it requires to make intentional decisions is actually, it's difficult.
That's the best time to play.
Move on to the next week.
But thank you very much.
Thanks so much.